Welcome to the jankiest YouTube setup in the world. I'm Kat. I think that's okay. I'm filming on my phone. I'm dressed like a swamp witch. I am a writer and an artist, and it's sort of normal nowadays to require being a person online for either of those professions. So I decided couple years ago to start making, a couple years ago I started streaming. My laptop didn't enjoy that, so I had to stop streaming. So now I'm like, okay, well I can make videos. My laptop also didn't like that, so I put it off and put it off and put it off. And I was like, you know what? We're doing this on my phone. We're doing it jankily because it's better to do it poorly, get better over time if this works out, than to not do it at all and find that you've got 50 novels that you can't even sell because no one knows that you exist. I always wanted to be an artist or a writer, and that neither are easy professions to get into, and so I sort of committed myself more to art because I thought that that was better, and now it's sort of proving that actually writing's going to be easier because you can self-publish nowadays. And I am a bit niche, and I'm well aware that my writing is niche, and to be a niche writer professionally, you can't go through the traditional publishing route. I love fantasy, as you can probably tell, and I love like the sort of gothic, you know, horror sort of vibe, the more like subtle, suspenseful kind of horror. And so of course, when I write, I'm writing like fantasy with a darker sort of edge, but not unhopeful. And it's like I write romance, but I'm not writing like romance. I'm writing like slow burn romance, and so it's like I'm very well aware that I have quite the niche going. But I am a fast writer. I am blessed with lightning fast fingers. Just last week I wrote for 53.5 hours total, and I ended up with I think 20 chapters. I'm not 100% sure on that. I should probably look that up, but I'm not going to. It was something like 48,000 words in a week. And that is unusual for me. Usually I'm not writing quite that much. Usually I limit myself to less hours so that I don't burn out and whatnot, but I hadn't written for a few weeks just because of life, and so I was just like, oh my god, I had to write. Like it was like an addiction. Like I was sitting there during D&D and I'm like literally like, I need to write, I want to write, I don't want to be here, I don't want to be doing this. And I enjoy D&D. So it was just one of those weeks where it was just kind of like that's all I could think about. So I wrote a lot. So I have kind of an urban fantasy kind of thing. That one, it was originally just urban fantasy, our world plus magic users as the main thing, but this is a world which has vampires and has shifters and stuff. And then I sort of went, you know what, I'm going to be self-published. I can be niche. I can just go for it. Be niche. It's not our world but anymore. It's an entirely different world which I was working on for a different story, except it's sort of more in the future for that. So it's kind of, instead of our world, it's more like our world with an alternate history, so it's kind of a bit more diesel punky, a little more atom punky, but like not entirely, and we're still focusing so much more on the magical elements, so it's going to feel like an our world but except it isn't. It's still kind of urban fantasy, it's just that the urban is a bit more fantasy. So there's that story, and it's basically the first book. It's a trilogy. I've decided it's a trilogy. That may change. I've written the first draft for the first book, and it's essentially, it's a ghost story. Character at a magic university, learning magic, but there's a ghost. At its absolute most basic form, that's what the story is. And of course, slow burn romance. Gotta have a little bit of slow burn romance, but it's more of a dash of romance. It's much more about the ghost story. So that's the first story. That one is currently called Fyrthol, and the main character is Abigail. That's that story. The story that I wrote last week, so I'm most of the way through the first draft of the first book. That one's going to be a duology. The first book is A Dragon Blooms, and the second book is A Flower Soars. And I love those names. They're great. And that is in the same world as Fyrthol, except it's roughly 10,000 years earlier. So this is this is high fantasy as opposed to the low fantasy of Fyrthol. So it is another world entirely. It is not elves and dwarves and whatnot, but it is another world entirely, which is like the definition of high fantasy. It's just not Tolkien-esque high fantasy. And I'm hoping I'm using all these terms correctly, but this is my understanding of the terms. And that one is a slow burn romance, like all the way. There are, you know, like fantasy elements like spirits, and I want to say dragons, but they're not like dragons. They're not like they're not like dragons. Basically one culture worships dragons. So there are dragons, but they're not like within the story, they're much more like godlike figures. First book, A Dragon Blooms. That book is about Thalia going from her country Lhoēketha to the other country, Eladon, where she meets the other POV character, Edrom. High fantasy. I got all the fun names that no one's going to be able to pronounce. It's cool. I'll have pronunciation guides. So she goes to Eladon, and she meets the other POV character. So that first story is sort of about her, like both of them sort of deciding that they are in love with each other kind of thing. And then the second book, A Flower Soars, is she's back in her home country, Lhoēketha, and he goes from Eladon to Lhoēketha after her. So both books follow both POVs, but it's kind of more like this book, she's moving to his place, and so it's kind of more about her. And then the second book is about him going to her place, so it's much more about him. But that one is slow burn, and oh my god, I love it so much at the moment. I'm seriously just completely like obsessed, and I so want to share. I want to share it so badly. And actually, like, hold on, I can show you sketches. Okay, hang on, let's get back in frame properly. I'm on my wheelie chair. Anyway, the advantage of being an artist and author is I get to draw all my stuff. So these are just the main two projects at the moment when it comes to novel writing. If you happen to follow my art account, you may be aware that I also have a comic, Crescent Saint, which I was going to go and do and all of this, and it was going to be amazing. And I've been working on it since I was 14, but comics are so much more work. So I've shelved it and am putting my novels are my main focus at the moment. And I would love to do this comic one day as well, Crescent Saint, but we're not worrying about that right now. Fyrthol, the first book is Echoes of the Past. So Fyrthol, Echoes of the Past, which follows Abigail, and then there's I call it the Dragonflower Duology because it's easier than saying a dragon blooms, a flower soars all the time. So I needed to have a proper like duology title. So the first sketch is this little fella. So this is my first like proper nice sketch of the dragons. Again, there aren't that many, they're godlike figures, but I wanted to know what they were so that I could this dragon design. Yes, it's identifiably a dragon. It has wings and it has, you know, lizard features, but it's much more bird-like. And this is kind of what I'm saying by it's high fantasy, but it's not like classically well-established high fantasy tropes and whatnot, and I kind of am doing my own thing. Something that has always kind of bothered me with dragons is people love to make the fire breathing make sense. They're like, okay, well, this is how fire breathing works in other creatures and everything, but they kind of ignore the rest of the creature. And frequently what they do is they show wyvern instead of you know, the traditional four-legged dragons, the classic European dragons, I should say. And so what I wanted was to make the classic European dragon feel a little more real and make more sense. And people say, oh, well, they're basically dinosaurs. They're winged dinosaurs. It's like, well, winged dinosaurs weren't like that really. And dinosaurs had feathers. So if you know anything about birds, you can sort of tell some of the influences, like the secretary bird. I happen to know a couple people who are like really into animals. So that's where I got a lot of the inspiration for this. So this world, it's high fantasy for sure, but it's not like high fantasy as you may know it. And I don't want to sit here and be like, oh my god, it's the best thing ever because I'm so unique. It's just that it's more about how I always view this is how dragons should be to me. I think dragons should have feathers. And this is what I'm saying. It's kind of like, I realized I'm niche, and I realized that I'm going to go down the self-publishing route, which means that I can kind of I can be really self-indulgent. I can make this fantasy world 100% how I want, because the marketability doesn't matter quite so much with self-publishing, because you will find an audience no matter what you do. Like, I've read some insane stuff, whereas traditional publishing is much more like, no, that's not marketable. No, we need something that people recognize. It's a lot harder to do your own thing. Definitely people do, and you know, there's plenty of traditionally published books in here that I adore. Self-publishing allows for so much more creative freedom, and you can do kind of weird, kooky things. So when I decided, okay, I'm going to do self-publishing, it kind of gave me license to do whatever. And it sort of took a while for me to realize, I'm like, oh yeah, I can do whatever. Okay, cool. I'll just do this. And I was still thinking about the marketability. And then I was just like, you know what? Fuck it. I've read some bizarre things. I've read some crazy out there things. Like, why wouldn't my ideas work? And I think that because I'm much more passionate about those ideas and having the world look like that, I think it's going to resonate with more people as well. So I was like, let's just go ham. Let's do what I want to do. And if I want to have feathered dragons that look more like birds than lizards, then absolutely, I'm gonna do that. I think it looks cool. So I drew some of my characters here. This is Abigail, one of the earliest sketches of her, and this is the earliest sketch of Thalia. So she won't look exactly like that. Of course, none of these characters will, because these sketches are a little old, but it gives you kind of a bit of an idea of the kind of main characters that I have. One of the other advantages of doing self-publishing and doing your own thing and really committing to doing your own thing is that you don't need to worry as much. I'm someone who is very, very interested in history. I love history. And writing things that are fantastical but sort of written in this world, I feel like it needs to be really anchored in history and it needs to make sense. Because I've kind of allowed myself to not just do traditional high fantasy or more marketable high fantasy, I'm kind of like, okay, well, why can't I have corsets? It's fantasy. The magic is available. The sort of technology would be available earlier as well, which allows me to do all sorts of like weird, interesting things with like silhouettes. And I know that it's a novel, you can't see any of this, but like in my mind I'm like imagining the ballroom in Eilidon, and I'm like thinking much more in the terms of 2015 Cinderella, her dress. Like that's kind of the shape and the materials and whatnot, and we are able to do that. Historically completely wouldn't be a thing to have a dress that looks like that seems to shimmer and shine and it looks like watercolor. But in a fantasy setting, well, they will have different fabrics. In a world that's entirely not our own, they have different fabrics. So of course you can do that. Of course you can push it a little further. You can have bigger, bolder, sort of more modern things, but it still makes sense. And I don't want it to be like modern. Like for example, these ones feels very modern. I want it to feel historical, but not our history. So much more like, I mean, he's the master, like Tolkien, except I am writing a, you know, first person romance as opposed to how Tolkien wrote. So the things that he has that make it feels like a real place, it feels like a real thing. It's going to differ just based on the way that we've written them, of course. Not saying I'm like at all compared to Tolkien, but I grew up on his world and I absolutely adore it. So of course I'm heavily influenced. But yeah, so the people of Lhoēketha have much more traditional medieval silhouettes, whereas they're technically neighboring country, Eilidon, but there's this like huge mountain range that is like near impassable, and even if you do pass it, like go through one of the mountain passes, it's horrific. So very few people do, because spirits and monsters and stuff, you know. So very few people do. So they can be like very different technologically and culturally, and it still works and it still makes sense. You know, historically inspired, but a little bit different. We're talking like things like this, you know, where it's kind of lots of different eras. Don't worry about that one. Lots of different eras sort of mixed together. It's definitely very inspired by the sort of 1850s, 1860s, like that sort of time period. But also with a little bit of ideas that are, you know, further back in history. People don't give that much love to the sort of like 1500s sort of style of clothing, and so I have sort of some ideas from in there. Obviously everyone loves the Victorian era. Like everyone loves the Victorian era, but that sort of Tudor gowns and whatnot that are just gorgeous. Like, oh my god, stunning, stunning, absolutely stunning. And then there's one scene which, spoilers, my main character wears a pretty dress. This is Thalia. So I'm saying her name wrong because I've like created this whole language, not super in depth like at all, but I've created this language, and her name has a sound that I find really difficult to say, which is not the most intelligent thing to do in the world. But yeah, so Thalia is how you'd say it if it was in Eilidon, if it was in Ailish. An Ailish person saying her name would say Thalia. How her people Lhoēketha would say her name is much more Valer, like that. Like it's got that French uvula R, which I find really difficult. But yeah, so she is dressed by an Ailish seamstress. And so they're sort of mixing the two styles together. And I know I haven't shown any Lhoēk styles yet, but just imagine that very like sort of a little figure hugging, but not like actually intentionally figure hugging, like sort of very straight medieval dresses. We're talking like the, you know, 12th, 13th century kind of. And then she's dressed in the much more, they all wear masks in Lhoēk as well, for reasons, which maybe I'll get into. But yeah, so she wears this red velvet gown that this character's made of with beaded dragons on it, which is awesome. I was designing the masks a little bit, which I'm still not entirely 100% sure on. So they wear, the people of Lhoēk, which are the Lhoēketha, they wear masks all the time. Not all the time, but pretty much all the time. So these are the sketches of some of the tutors that work at Fyrthol. They're not, this is the first time drawing a lot of them. Some of them, I have a pretty good idea of this character, who, her name is Miss Durand. Her name has changed. It was Miss Ward, now it's Miss Durand, but it was very briefly Miss Durand with a T. So there's some of the characters from Fyrthol. Fyrthol is low fantasy, except it's in a different world. So it's kind of, well, I don't know, it's one of those, it's awkward, like low fantasy, high fantasy. It's urban fantasy. Yeah, it's all these terms are kind of a bit nebulous. Anyway, I mentioned that it's kind of a little diesel punky. So this is a bus, and this is the robot that drives the bus. One of the things I was, working on something else, but I decided for some reason that I wanted to design that. I think to get an idea of the sort of technology level that they were at. So yeah, I think they're kind of a cool little dude. This guy. So the problem with sketchbooks is you get like just random, I just want to do all those sketches, and amongst the sketches that you need, here's something a little interesting, a little different. So this is some samples. This is the alphabet and whatnot for the Lhoēketha language. So I have the historic alphabet, which is more angled, and then the modern alphabet, which is a little more curved. So this is a culture that's very much into tradition and history and whatnot. So even over like the 10,000 years, I might make it change a little more, but more to do with the sentence structure and whatnot, as opposed to the lettering. Some of our letters that we use are like weirdly historic as well. So, but they were very traditional people. So I didn't want it to change too much. Alish changes a lot, I feel, from historic to the Alish that they speak in modern times. Lhoēk is very isolated, so a lot of their stuff does stay the same. So yeah, and I have this kind of interesting thing where I'm not a big language person. I'm much more of an artist, much more like into folklore and creatures and stuff. But I was like, you know, well, I can make an alphabet, I can make language, I can do it, I'm sure. So I did this kind of interesting thing where all of their words are unified by a line going through them. So hang on. Yeah, so that there says Lhoēketha. So you can kind of see it's mirrored, I think. Yeah, it's mirrored. So you've got the which is an LH is how I put it into English, and then you've got the vowel underneath. So you have like the consonant and then vowel, and that's the vowel which I'd write in as W in English. So that's Lhū, and then K. That is A, but it's the longer A sound, I think. Double check. Nope, short A sound, whoopsie daisies. And then S. So Lhoēketha, that's just one word. Nice and easy. That's a character's name. So he's called Lucas, which is a very strange and unusual name in Fyrthol. But it's because no one can pronounce Lh, because it's an unusual sound. So Lhoēketha is frequently called Lucas. Everyone calls him Lucas because they can't say his name. So he even prefers it, Lucas, as opposed to Lhoēketha, but that's his name. So I've got a little bit of that language, and that's the language that Falia speaks is Lhoēketha, which is the same as Lucas is also from that country, although he was raised on Fyrthol entirely, which I think it might be a mild spoiler, but that's fine. So they're from the same thing, but obviously 10,000 years apart. That's kind of all I've got. I've got plenty of other stuff on my computer, but I'm not going to sit here and record my computer. It's just going to look awful. And I can't record anything on my laptop because it will die. It hates it so much. I could do screenshots. Maybe I will. I probably won't. Yeah, this is a lot. But I just wanted to introduce, you know, me. I'm Kat. I'm a writer, I'm an artist, and a little bit to do with the stories that I'm working on, and just kind of go, hello, I'm here. I would love to talk a little bit more about all sorts of stuff, not just my opinions on films and books and this and that, but the writing process and storytelling and folklore, and you know, I have a lot of opinions and I hope a fair amount of knowledge. It feels like I've got a fair amount of knowledge. I know I speak pretty fast. Sorry. I'm working on a trilogy and a duology currently. In theory, the trilogy will be coming out first. If it's the one that I'm like, this is the one that I want to get done. So that's Fyrthol with Abigail, and I've got the first draft of the first book done, and it is good. I will admit, I'm pretty happy with it. That's not bad. That's for a first draft. That's not bad. So I definitely need to work on some stuff, do a second draft, send it to beta readers, blah, blah, blah. You know, it's a huge process. I've been writing since I was about 9 years old, which is coming on 20 years of experience. And I've never released anything, and I've never put my writing online more than a small excerpt on Instagram, you know, and I'd love to share a little bit. So I probably will also do little, I don't want to make any promises, but I had the idea of sort of reading out a chapter or two here on YouTube and sort of doing a little bit of commentary about it and the sort of thing. I think that would be fun. Take you along with the writing process. Not all of it, just, you know, the first few chapters. I'm definitely not going to do like the last chapters. No. Are you kidding? I'm very excited. I'm very, very excited at the moment. I really want to, I want to share what I've been working on for all of these years. I have lots of projects and lots of things I want to do. And of course, I can't really do them without people who want to buy them. So this is not only an attempt to find people who might vibe with me and my stuff, but it's also practice to get myself out there and to sort of be more confident and comfortable talking about these projects, because I need to be able to sell them to people. So I hope that you enjoyed this hopefully not too long-winded video. Maybe, I hope you'll stick around. Thank you very, very much for making it this far. If you have made it this far, if you haven't made this far, well, you know, thank you anyway, except you won't be hearing it, but I will thank you anyway. I hope it did good. Like and subscribe.